This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
Out here, there's no one way of doing things. No unwritten rules. And no shortage of adventure. Because out here, the only requirement is having fun. Bank of America invites kids 6 to 18 to golf with us. For a limited time, sign them up for a free 1-year membership, giving them access to discounted tee times at thousands of courses. Learn more at bankofamerica.com/golf with us. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America. Restrictions apply. See BofA.com/golf with us for complete details. Copyright 2025 Bank of America Corporation.
From the Fifth Quarter Studio in Madison, Wisconsin, you're listening to the Basketball Leadership Podcast. Here are your hosts, Steve Collins and Greg Berg.
Hey, Coach. Welcome to the Basketball Leadership Podcast. I'm so excited you decided to join. Before we jump in, real quick, go over and check out Coach Berg's website, gberg.gumroad.com. It is awesome. You will not be disappointed. It's a little bit of everything. There's free resources over there with a preseason checklist, off-season playbook, all sorts of great things. Go over and check it out. All half of it's free. I should yell at him for all the free stuff he's giving away, but it's great. His team leader OS is awesome. So go over and check that out. Also, when you're there and you're thinking about it, go over and check out teachhoops.com for coaches who want to get better. You take that leadership, you take all the stuff that I have built over the last 30 years to build a nationally ranked team, to be nationally ranked, to win 3 state championships. Everything I have learned over the last 30 years is in teachhoops.com. Go over and check it out. I don't think you'll be disappointed. 14-day free trial. And let's head off to the podcast. Bye.
I am your host, Coach Bill Flitter. We have a guest today, Shay Balish from Curve Health. Shay, welcome to the show.
Bill, appreciate it. Excited to jump into things.
Yeah, and Shay, thank you. This is the third episode that we've had you on sharing your expertise, and we appreciate that. Can you give our listeners, maybe this is the first time they're hearing about you, tell us about your background, a little bit about the company. But before we do that, we're going to dive into, as you guys saw probably from the show notes and overview, we're going to talk about injury prevention, and Shay's going to offer us insight and input on how Curve helps with injury prevention and things that they're doing to help young athletes succeed on and off the court or any sport they are doing. Shay, take it away.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, so really quickly, my background, I'm a horrible Canadian. I don't play hockey, never really even skated much, but I was a basketball player, so played competitively my whole way through. I kind of over-specialized in some ways. I played basketball year-round, trained year-round. It was an obsessive passion for me. I still love it. I went on and played at the university level, coached for a few years, then ended up falling in love with science, really. Ended up doing a lot of research around sports psychology. So I ended up doing a PhD and a master's and PhD in sports psychology, and then held a research fellowship at the University of Toronto for a few years before I kind of left to build products in this space, because I believe so deeply in some of the technology that's actually coming out, and it's doing really interesting things, allowing us to actually take a lot of the insights and tools in this space around whether it be sports psychology or nutrition or injury prevention, which we're talking about today, and actually bring them down to democratize them to the mass market, right? Because if you're involved in sport, in particular basketball, you know that most of the really interesting tools have kind of been reserved for elite level pro athletes. They haven't made their way down market, and now they're finally starting to do that. And that's really a bit of the mission of our company. But anyways, that's a little bit of background on me.
No, I appreciate you sharing, and yeah, and if you're interested in the other topics that Shay and I have been discussing, you can go to your favorite podcast service and look for those others on nutrition and some of the other topics that we discussed prior. Let's start this off. It's interesting you talk about, we're talking about, high school, youth sports, and, these tools that you've created at Curve have been reserved for quote unquote professionals. I would argue over the next couple years, what makes a professional sport? Generally at the highest level, I get paid to play, right? We are seeing huge changes at the youth sports level where they're going to get paid to play, right down to the high school level. So that, I know we're talking about injury prevention, but, youth sports is becoming a professional level activity, and we need tools like you've created, and injury prevention is going to be a huge one, and it's going to take a team. And I love that concept that you guys are bringing, that you're bringing a team. We can just say it's an app, but it's not. It's a team of people that will help these young athletes succeed. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or comments.
No, definitely. I think, the way I understood your question is like, why is this relevant now more than ever?
Yeah, exactly.
And really what's happening. And, we talked about this in a previous episode around all of the, to be crude, mental obstacles athletes have to go through now.
Yeah.
And which is why sports psychology and mental performance is so relevant. And the same thing is happening with, the physical obstacles, the physical body. When you see how sports are maturing, amateur sports are changing to the point where a lot of athletes are specializing at earlier and earlier ages. Right? If you look at the historical trends, and you can go back to your favorite professional basketball players 30, 40 years ago, they often grew up playing multiple different sports. It was always a fun little analogy or insight for Canadians that Steve Nash, this phenomenal basketball player and later coach, also I think did play soccer quite competitively, even professionally, or at least I think he was part of the national team at one point. Don't hold me to that. But,
no, he definitely played soccer at a higher level. Yep.
And a lot of athletes just aren't doing that. They're specializing at earlier ages, and they're not really taking a whole lot of time off. And that is not just increasing these like overuse injuries or chronic injuries, but it's also facilitating other types of more serious injuries. And so as I think the amateur market, the youth sport market evolves and matures, for better or worse, athletes are encountering a lot more injuries. And some of these injuries are changing their athletic career, right? Athletes are hiding them because they think they won't be recruited. And they're really failing to manage them. So I think what we need, and look, this is just a bit of a focal point of mine. I don't want to stress it too much, but as the youth sport landscape is changing, the people that support these athletes need better tools to help care for them. And we can't just leave it up to parents. Parents will do the best they can, but they don't really have the network or the expertise to really vet which tools are relevant and which providers are relevant. And so I think a lot of it falls on the coaches. Coaches, unfortunately or fortunately, will have to be a little bit more aware of all the other things that are happening to their athletes. And they need better tools for it.
Well, and if you think about it, in a lot of cases, these young adults are playing more basketball games than the professionals are. But yet the professionals have, I got injured. Okay, well, let's send you to our team doctor, right? my injury is really affecting my mental health. Well, let's send you to our, mental health specialist that can help you, right? Now you got to worry about, nutrition, right? And so it all ties together. And that's what I like about what you guys are doing is you've recognized that need to bring this team to the athletes at a very, again, reasonable cost, which is very exciting as this market continues to evolve and grow. But my question here is, as I think about injuries, what are you seeing on the basketball side? If you can maybe speak to that a little bit of where are you seeing the most or what types of injuries, and of those injuries that are kind of maybe like in the top three, as a coach, what can I do to prevent or help or at least slow those injuries down, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Obviously I don't have 100% control over that, but maybe there are a few things I can do.
Yeah. Well, if you take the two ways to frame it, we can try to prevent injuries or we can try to manage them like post-injury. And the post-injury management in basketball in particular has changed quite a bit. Concussions have seemingly always been a problem for other sports than basketball. But we're starting to recognize now that there are a meaningful amount of concussions in basketball. It's a hard floor. People got sharp elbows. Athletes are taught to play with their elbows. They're hitting chins on top of heads, diving into stands. And so concussions is such a strenuous and sad topic because it can really end an athlete's entire career seemingly out of the blue. At least if you tear an ACL, which is still a horrific injury, and that's still probably the second most relevant injury for basketball athletes, especially females. But concussions, it affects your daily life. Some kids are getting pulled out of school for months on end. They're maybe sometimes having to be held back a year because they can't actually study. And so the cultural climate that a coach can set and ensuring that athletes are not actually being tough if they're hiding concussion or concussion symptoms is a big benefit for coaches. Also for a coach and a club to be able to understand a bit of the medical history of the athletes they have coming in. If an athlete has a history of several concussions or even one, and if it's not too far into the past, that is something you need to know. And it often ends up relying on parents, but some parents aren't involved as others, right? So there's a big crack in the floor there that athletes can really fall into. As a practicing sports psychologist years ago, I worked with a number of athletes who had several injuries, and their parents were like, "Hey, my kid just needs help to navigate this process. They're on the verge of hanging up, their basketball shoes for the rest of their life." And it's just really sad. So that's one thing. Concussions continue to be an issue. In terms of preventing concussions, the nature of sport, it's really hard. It's just really hard. Right. Sport, it's a physically, aggressive and intense sport, and you're going to have some concussions. But the second thing I alluded to is knee injuries, in particular ACL injuries, in particular females. Mm-hmm. It's really unfortunate that there is a huge epidemic. And if you don't believe me, go watch your favorite WNBA team and maybe do a little research on how many members of your favorite team have had an ACL repair. How many? It will blow you away.
It is amazing. It's absolutely stunning. I was just talking to a coach that she played at St. Mary's. Her career ended because of an ACL. She missed, at least she played 3 games in one of the years. Two of her teammates right now are out, and they're young, right? And some of them are on their second ACL injury. Do you have any insight? And I know you're not a doctor by any stretch of the means here. I don't want to, position you that way, but what does the research say about why that happens? Is it more about the body shape, the hips, the why do females suffer more than males?
Yeah. Um, from my Again, I'm no expert in this space,
Yeah,
but my understanding is that there's a biomechanical difference between male and female, essentially the knees, and there's different angles that the female knee takes under where stress is distributed through that predisposes ACL tears. So that's
yeah,
one.
yeah.
The evolutionary story, if it's relevant or not, of why there would be anatomical differences between those two is not totally clear, but it's seemingly that males engaged in far more kind of warfare or physically aggressive combat, which would have selected for more stable knees, perhaps. There's some
Interesting. Yeah.
evolutionary anthropologists have argued that. There's also, I think, I think there's little evidence, but there's some arguments that just the hormonal cycle that males do go through, but females go through as well, and the hormones that sometimes can facilitate pregnancy
Mm.
may may be a contributing factor, but I think there's still a lot of research ongoing, right? A lot of it's
Mm.
really ongoing. So really where most of the focus in this space is not really why, but how do we manage this and how
Yeah,
do we
yeah, that was
apply the
going to be
right
my, yeah,
features?
sorry to, yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a, it is such a big problem, especially with females. But in general, as a coach, am I doing anything to cause that more so than, am I doing, that's, am I doing a drill that is going to, cause them to have an ACL injury, or is it more just really about repetitiveness?
Yeah, I think the way a coach organizes their practice, in terms of the actual strategies and tactics they're teaching and the nature of the gameplay, I don't think there's much you can actually do. I think where most of the yield and the benefit that a coach can create is sown in kind of preventative exercises and stretches, more of a physical therapy approach. So if certain coaches, and many are now doing this, especially competitive female basketball coaches, are taking more of a preventive approach where they're more aware and they're starting to develop warm up routines that
Mm,
occur at the beginning of practice or are recommended to athletes that they do between practices around strengthening particular muscles that support the knee. That seemingly is where the best lever point is for reducing ACL tears.
So just generally speaking, then doing some sort of warm up pre-practice is doesn't guarantee it, but it definitely will help.
Yeah,
Is what it, yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And in some ways, it's a warm up, right? You also have to like if warm up the neuromuscular system so everything's firing because that can also be a component. Like acute injuries are so overdetermined by multiple different factors, but you have to put effort in. One is a warm up, but other is actually strengthening. So if some
Mm, mm.
coaches don't believe that their athletes are going to do the strengthening exercises outside of the gym, they'll literally take their own practice time to put this in at the beginning or the start. Well, they'll run the team through a number of kind of free body movements, so they're not necessarily picking up weights, but they're doing one-legged hops, for example,
Mm,
and a number of other things
yeah,
that can start to build more supportive muscles, really.
yeah, yeah. That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Talk about a player being injured versus just it's sore. I'm hurt, right?
Yeah.
And playing injured versus playing hurt. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I had an assistant coach when somebody would get hurt, he would ask them a series of questions, and I'm blanking on exactly those questions to determine if they were injured or hurt. But he did it routinely. He actually was a firefighter and a police officer in his past life, so he had the right questions to ask. But I think that is how do I know as an athlete or as a coach if I'm truly injured or I'm just it's a little sore.
Right. This is such a complex topic because,
Yeah.
I applaud people that have tried to regiment the system a little bit where they'll go in with a number of questions like you mentioned, but a lot of it often isn't sufficient, right? So you have to understand the athletes that you're working with. You have to know their personal characteristics, which ones might be lying to you, exaggerating, trying to tough it out. In the same sense, a lot of coaches, and this is their job, is to help an athlete, show an athlete that they can move beyond their limits. And you may have a young athlete that is overly scared of injuring themselves, which is then hampering their performance. And so you also want to show that athlete how to toughen up. I'm not saying that there's never an opportunity to help an athlete build their own toughness, right? We don't want to rob athletes of feeling tough and powering through when necessary, because some things need to be powered through. So it really is a complex dance. And I think a lot of researchers in this space, and especially the academics, will come in with not the most practical view. Well, they'll say any risk is too much risk and pull the athlete out, sit them down. And you're also, that is also robbing them of some of the experiences and maybe creating a culture of fear as well. So it's such a complex dance. My recommendation is to get to know your athletes really well. If you're a coach, you probably should. You probably should understand on a case-by-case basis the potential injury, the way an athlete would respond to injury, and how you can actually assess if toughing it out is the right move or it's the wrong move. And it is a dance. In terms of actually pulling an athlete off the court, I think a lot of coaches also forget that, these athletes are autonomous agents. They're human beings. They should have some say in their process as well. They have their own risk tolerances. The parents have their own risk tolerances. So balancing all the various, you could fully understand the injury risk of an athlete, but and everyone could be fully on the same page around what slight injury the athlete has. But because of the risk tolerance between the parent, the athlete, and the coach, there could be a meaningful disagreement. So setting up some of these expectations, or setting almost a policy in your team that you communicate to parents around how you handle injuries, will be really important. And ultimately, I think this is where coaches can better interface with their parents, say, look, this is how I tend to handle injuries. This is where I think I'll be pulling athletes out and moving them through the process. This is where I feel most comfortable. And it also allows the parents to feel more involved, so they're not complaining. As we all know, the parents complain so much. So when you build that,
I have no idea what you're talking about, Shay.
Yeah. I have no idea. Yeah.
They don't. Oh, that must be a Canadian thing. They don't complain down here in the States.
Yeah, I bet.
I had a good question here for you. Ankle braces. It's been a long time debate, right? Wear them. Some people say if you wear them, it'll help. Some people say they cause weak ankles, right? If you do wear them. So does the research point one way or the other?
I'm not familiar with the literature on that topic.
Yeah.
In my days of coaching and playing competitive basketball, I've played with athletes that just wore them constantly because a series of ankle injuries they had, stalled their career, and they just never want to take that risk again. Yeah, braces are tough, right? Because you could also, mandate knee braces as well. Yeah. And you can go through the whole process, and then all of a sudden knee braces are actually causing injuries on other athletes when they're bumping up against them. So it's a really tough play. And I tend to try to look at things and evaluate them as like, is this a Band-Aid, or is this actually going to solve this problem that we have? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes braces, to me, are a very useful tool, but you use them, I don't want to say as a last resort, but after you've done the real work of strengthening your body. So again, if you're playing basketball year round, you're moving in particular ways, and your muscles are getting strong in some ways and kind of weak in others because they're not being used in those other ways. Or the proper term is there's creating imbalances. And you can try to rebalance the muscles in the lower body, for example, to handle those issues, then, and that doesn't work, then maybe braces can be a good idea. But that's my personal opinion, not a professional opinion.
Yeah. And a lot of times it does come down to preference, right, by the coach if they want their athletes to wear the braces.
That's your money saying it's time for a McDonald's run. Because with new McValue at McDonald's, you get more than you expect. Like buy a 6-piece McNuggets and add a McChicken for just $1. Your money says let's go. Get more than you expect with new McValue. Prices and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
I think you touched on a subject that I think is probably one of the more, is a bigger subject or a bigger topic in this area, which is these elite level athletes. They're going to these showcases. Coaches are going to, college coaches are going to be there. It's their time to shine in front of the college coaches. So they may play through an injury, right, just to be on the court. I don't know if I have a question in that, but, that is a huge concern of them concealing injuries that could then prevent them from playing long term. And I guess it comes down to the coach to say, okay, we got to sacrifice this tournament, right? And because you may miss the next 5 tournaments if we don't. Yes. And communicating that to a parent to say, okay, there'll be other tournaments that, if you're in these elite level, right, leagues, there's going to be other times. So coach kind of taking a stance on that as well, and holding some ground of maybe limiting playing time but explaining so you don't have the complaints. Probably a good take. Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of my broader realizations is, look, I think anyone, if you're involved in sports at some point, you're probably a pretty confident person, right? Especially if you're a coach and others. And you also are probably a good person. You're usually there donating your time, you're trying to help. Then the important thing to be aware of is that you can't, like, coaches often want to do a lot, and they do need to be more aware of the injury risk and help manage it. But also, let's be real, the athletes, the parents, and the coaches aren't really suited to give meaningful advice.
That's right.
And oftentimes, if you go out and seek say a physical therapist or even some other specialty, if they're not familiar with your sport, they also might not have the most relevant advice for you. They might have more generic advice for you. And so that's why I believe, in the future, for a family, a parent, and athlete to have immediate access to some of this expertise could be really, really valuable, right? And where do you find a great physical therapist that really understands basketball and the nature of your athlete?
It might not be in your hometown, right? And that's what I think you guys are talking about, is bringing, these sport-specific practitioners, right, forward and giving me access to that.
Absolutely. We go in and we meet with families and athletes, and we give that family their own, and that athlete really, their own dedicated team of healthcare professionals that they can access.
With that said,
often end up building relationships, and relationships continue on for a long time. And it's a reasonable thing to do.
Well, and this is a good segue into what you're bringing to the table, what the app does. So, as we know, and as I even study this area a little bit more, you have sleep, nutrition, mental health, physical health. All of this is tied together, and typically we've always looked at it in silos, and even in the just the general medical field, right? It's like, I have this issue, so I go see this specialist, and then I go over here to see this specialist. All of it is linked. At least that's my opinion. and maybe you can dive into a little bit specifics on the app, but are you looking at that as a holistic, and does the physical therapist, as an example, have the notes on the nutritionalists and the mental health? Can they see that within the app? So it's like you said, it's one team.
They absolutely can work together. That's the way we designed it. First of all, when we will work with a family and we surround them with, say this family wants a sports psychologist, a sport nutritionist, and let's call it injury prevention specialist.
Yeah.
Those three individuals from our company will know each other. They know they will work well together already. And they know they can converse and understand what the best course of action, how they can bring kind of coordinated care to that athlete. In terms of actually sharing chart notes, there's some understandable kind of privacy regulations and confidentiality regulations that we want to align with. So we try to really leave that up to the athlete to share that. But these professionals can talk about the best way to deliver coordinated, or if you want to call it, interdisciplinary care.
Yeah, that's great.
There's a lot of overlap in the back end. So if our injury prevention specialist is working with a young female basketball player and putting her on an ACL injury prevention program, our sports psychologist will understand that, and such they won't try to overwhelm them with maybe competing activities to do in between practices, because the kid is already so busy. And maybe they will actually build out and likely complement that program with the right mental skills and tools that the athlete should learn while they're going through their kind of injury prevention program. So it's very much coordinated.
Oh, that's awesome. Talk to me about I'm really fascinated about this. And, we in the previous podcast, we didn't really talk about this, but the body scanning technology, how does that work, and what is it, and what does it do, and how do I use it as an athlete? And I know we're on a picture's worth 1,000 words. It'd probably be easier, but explain it to your best of your ability over audio.
Absolutely. There is an emerging field. The evidence is still accumulating around being able to ideally, predict injury by looking at the quality of a movement of an athlete. And sometimes these are called movement screens, and I'm just using this as an example.
Yeah.
There's also beyond movement screens, you would also see a number of different particular kind of clinical measures. Sometimes there's simple surveys, and sometimes there's actual movement that can occur. They'll use these in settings with athletes, but they're also used in settings with, say, elderly people that are at risk of falling and hurting themselves.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
so we can use this essentially motion capture technology, an ability to objectively, without a human involved, measure the biomechanics, the movement of an athlete in their own home. If they record themselves, it takes less than 5 minutes. We can scan them and start to provide real interesting feedback back to the care team, right? Back to their physical therapist or others. And also start to identify areas where movement quality could perhaps be more improved. I want to be careful around the terminology because this field is still building. But if you're looking at the functional movement skills of an athlete and they're struggling with flexibility in some particular ways, or they're having some movement asymmetries between the left and right side of their body, for example, these can be really sometimes important to target to help prevent injury. Again, injury prevention is a science that's in its infancy, and we're still trying to figure these things out. Mm-hmm. But for example, these things are in pro sports. Our company actually made a meaningful amount of money in our early days, got off the ground by licensing this computer vision scanning technology to an injury kind of management company that worked in pro sports, NBA, NFL, NHL. And we've had a number of pro athletes go through this scanning technology. So it is being used at high levels. And we're hopefully going to have enough data in the future to really start to understand what types of movement qualities are more indicative of future injury. But and again, injuries are so complex and overdetermined.
Right. One of the things that I always looked at, and again, not a doctor and not a therapist, but I've always noticed young athletes, early teens, very tight, right? They're which that their thighs, right, and hip flexors, that obviously pulls on other things, and it's a chain reaction. I'm assuming then that the scanning can help and does it make recommendations then if I can't touch my toes, right?
We don't make recommendations necessarily. We've always taken the position of informing or augmenting the information that our providers have, these clinicians, to actually go and deliver care. So we leave a lot of the interpretation part to the experts, the real humans.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you know what, from our feedback of being in this business, that's what athletes and parents want. They do want the human making their interpretation, but they want that human powered with the tools to gather all the right information and make the best decision. So, that's definitely one thing that we do. There's other similar areas in the platform that really help. In pro sports, probably the most popular and probably effective thing has been trying to gauge an athlete's overall readiness. And this idea of readiness is so complicated. There's so many statisticians in sports that have different definitions and trying to understand what this is. But you can imagine the variance or the fluctuations in, say, an athlete's ability to move their body appropriately under load varies day to day. Maybe the athlete had a late night out and they were out at a high school bar party and didn't sleep much, right? And maybe they had a lot of stress in their nervous system, or maybe they're drinking coffee, or and these things can show up in the day-to-day measurements. So looking at kind of the temporal fluctuations in how athletes are measured in terms of their readiness can be really valuable. One of the biggest surprising things that we built into the app from feedback was measuring athletes' sleep. So an athlete can choose to allow the platform to have access to their sleep data on their iPhone, and that can be really informative. And in fact, our coaches use that as a coaching point to start to educate these young athletes around getting enough sleep, because it actually impacts their performance and their injury risk. And then all of a sudden, the parents are happy because they have some other person, it's not the parents yelling at them or the coach,
get to bed.
Building a really healthy habit. So that's another thing that we can do with this technology. It's not always just a snapshot of where an athlete is in their general movement quality, but continuous test and retest day after day or week after week, and start to provide a more of a picture of where they are in their just general readiness in their life.
It's interesting you say that. I got a Fitbit for Christmas, right? And it tracks your readiness. There's a readiness score, and sometimes it's again it's new. I haven't had the 14 days yet, right? I think I'm on day 9 of it, and it's trending to be pretty accurate. And the readiness is like the readiness that you've recovered and you're ready to exercise. Where I see it kind of fail, so to speak, fail meaning Coach Bill is not ready to exercise, is based on a lot of it on sleep. And if I'm not getting an adequate or a sound sleep, and that really changes the readiness score. And also, when's the last time I exercise? What's my heart rate and all of that? I find that kind of useful, but at the same time, it's one of those things that's like, well, you know what? Yeah, my Fitbit's telling me I'm not ready, but this is the time I have right now to exercise.
Absolutely.
Right. So, or, just like an athlete would have our practices now, but the data says it's not, I shouldn't be practicing right now.
Absolutely. These are all tools for ultimately humans to make real decisions off, and you can't blindly follow what the data says sometimes. And That's also the beauty of sport, right? It's like, everyone can look good on paper, but when the game starts, it's a game for
That's
a reason.
right.
And underdogs can really pull it off a lot of the time. So yeah, it's complicated. I think we're swimming in too much data. There's some companies and apps that really do it really well. Whoop is super popular. They
Right. Yeah.
rely a lot on heart rate variability as a measure. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to really look at it. One of the things that I think happens with, elite athletes are so in tune with their body that once they start getting some data back, they can start to actually build their own mental model of how they feel. And it actually improves their own kind of internal compass of how they should manage their body. And so they don't just outsource that compass to the data and follow it blindly, but the data does help them improve their own kind of compass of how they should turn up or turn down their intensity, for example. And that's where I think the data can be really valuable. If it educating the athlete and getting them in a place where they're more confident and in tune with their body and they understand where and when to push, that's probably the biggest benefit that I see. And we try to do that with the company, right? There's a huge
Yeah.
educational component and behavior change component to any form of health and performance. And if the athlete isn't bought in and believing in it and changing their behavior, then ultimately they're just looking for a band-aid and someone else to do the hard things for them, and that never really works out.
One of the fascinating tools that I saw recently in action at a college level, and and it's not crazy expensive, and I would imagine that the expense will come down over time, but they're wearables to measure load and impact during practice, and you can measure it by athlete, you can measure it by team. And the particular practice that I sat in on, let's say they scheduled a 2-hour practice, but the intensity of that practice was so high that the coach called it at an hour and a half, because the data guy who was sitting on the sidelines measuring all this said, hey, we're reaching capacity at this point. So, you either need to adjust, do something that slows these guys down, or call practice. And that's interesting. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that and how prevalent that is, maybe at the college level or pro level.
I think it's increasingly prevalent, right? And in
Mhm.
particular for basketball, so much so much impact. You're jumping, you're landing, you're pushing
That's
off.
right. Yeah.
And that does have an effect on the body and on joints. A lot of people that play basketball for their entire, if they play competitively for a long time, end up having real struggles with their knees and hips, not to mention shoulders, but knees and hips in particular, just because of the simple compact, like a long distance runner would have with their knees, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, measuring that is super valuable. But again, a lot of things are somewhat idiosyncratic, right? It really depends on the athlete. Some athletes can handle more load than others. So I always come back to this maxim that, like, ultimately the athlete has the best source of information for how they're handling their body, and they need to be educated and informed with data. But ultimately those pieces will really improve the athlete's understanding of their own body and the risks that they want to take. Yeah, measuring load, it's very common. To answer your question directly, it's very common in pro sports. It's not something we do. We can pull some of this data in through Apple Health Kit a little bit into the platform, but we focus on more, not necessarily kind of load, but more like the qualities of an athlete, that of their makeup, rather than how much they're actually doing.
Yeah, and they're I talked to the guy who was doing this, and it's all about injury prevention. That's why they're doing it, right? And that load is, oh, do we have a game tomorrow or a game in 2 days, right? And we'll change that, how far we want to push them based on some of those variables as
Yep,
well. Well,
absolutely.
let's end on this. Can you
Scheduling.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, how you schedule your practices, how close to games, how many back-to-back should you have?
Yeah.
this is probably more relevant information as youth sports become hyper specialized and kind of mature.
Yeah, no doubt. In that, we didn't really even touch it, but we alluded to the specialization, which can cause more injuries, right? Because from overuse, using the same muscle versus, using multiple or doing multiple sports, then you're strengthening other muscles. And I'll just ask that as a question. Is like,
Sergeant and Mr. Smith, you're gonna love this house.
Bunk beds in a closet?
There's no field manual for finding the right home. But when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay. With experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
I think the data shows you should do multiple sports. Is that what you're seeing? Or
this is also such a complicated question.
I know.
So when you look at, there's some data that suggests that the best athletes they sampled more than they specialized compared to some other types of athletes. That research is a little problematic or confounded by the fact that these phenomenal athletes that end up playing at a very high level are so good, likely when they're younger, that they have success in multiple sports. So they want to sample. They're not necessarily sampling because they think it's a good idea or they naturally fell that way because their parents put them in sports. They're such good athletes that they're good at multiple sports, and thus they play multiple sports until they have one that really has seemingly a high ceiling, and then they go pursue that. So there's some debate in the literature. It's kind of this like Red Queen race like issue where to compete and make the top tier teams and be on that kind of fast track to the highest level of competition, that's happening earlier and earlier. And that requires younger athletes having far more skill than they otherwise required, which is then somewhat requiring specialization.
Interesting. Yeah.
So in some ways, it's a sociological problem. The nature of basketball, the nature of sports is requiring athletes to specialize because there's multiple tiers and teams at earlier and earlier ages. So that is sometimes, I think, a problem more generally, but it's also what's happening. I think that it is healthy to attempt to play multiple sports, and I think parents and coaches should give athletes the opportunity to sample multiple sports, but I wouldn't withhold an athlete who starts to develop a passion to pursue that either. Where I try to draw a bit of a point of finger, I guess, is when the parent may feel that the athlete doesn't have a choice and must specialize at the earliest ages to make particular teams. And then the parent is essentially pulling the athlete along into being specialized. That's not necessarily great. There's a motivational issue there. It can lead to burnout, an athlete dropping out, and also sometimes overuse injuries.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Tell us about how coaches can get involved, what your app does, and who really is it for?
Yeah, what we do is we build an athlete support system for families of athletes. So we usually meet with the athlete or meet with the parent, describe what we do. We curate a phenomenal sports psychologist, sport nutritionist, injury prevention specialist, put them into an app. So the app is a vehicle to communicate with them, to work with them, give that to the athlete and the parent. They can sign up for a very simple monthly fee. And then now they have access. Now your athlete is being coached maybe on their sleep or on their mental skills, how to handle stress, or on their injury, potential injury risk and things they can do. And a lot of this ties in together, of course. That's really what we do. We provide health and performance services effectively as a digital clinic or a digital training center for competitive athletes. Now, this is something that has always existed, right? It's existed at the highest levels, but now we're trying to bring it down to the youth level to really help these athletes and families who have big dreams of going and playing on at the next level.
Well, and I think that the other thing that comes to mind too is people think this is going to be, thousands of dollars a month, and it's not. It's you guys have done a great job to keep the price reasonable. And depending on the plan you get, right, it's under $100.
Yep.
And I think that is absolutely incredible when you're bringing an entire team of potential help, right? This is otherwise you're paying thousands of dollars for each specialist, and you guys have done a great job of bringing that together.
Yeah.
So if you're interested, coaches, go to coachingyouthhoops.com/health. Check out Curve. They're giving away free access for a limited time. So again, that URL is coachingyouthhoops.com/health. coachingyouthhoops.com/health. You want to add anything to that, Shay?
We're really excited to have this offer for your community. So we're giving coaches an opportunity to opt their team into this. So they give access to all their athletes free for the rest of the season. And then we built out a mechanism to give a report to coaches monthly so they can start to have a little more insight into their athletes' mental skills, their nutritional habits, their injury potential, injury risks or movement qualities they may want to manage. And it's all for free. We really wanted to give back to the community and spread this out. For us, these are software tools, and we can provide them for free and provide a lot of value for your community. Where the cost comes is really when a family, in particular an athlete, wants to work one-on-one with a real expert, say, sports psychologist or nutritionist or injury prevention specialist. And that's where the price comes, but that's always optional.
Yeah. And Shay, we thank you again for your time and really appreciate you bringing this offer to our community and making that available. I just think it's such a valuable tool that, is a no-brainer for, high school coaches to sign up and at least check it out to provide some additional information for the health of their athletes.
Absolutely. And I'm more than happy to meet one-on-one with the coaches that come on. I'm always trying to be at the forefront and listening to customers, listening to users, gathering feedback. It's my job. So would more than happy if a coach is on the fence or wants to learn more and wants to book a one-on-one call with me to talk about it. Happy to just sign up. All the coaches that sign up through Coaching Youth Hoops will be able to have that opportunity, and I'd love to take you up on it.
And Shay, we're going to see you back next week when we're going to talk about what it takes to be an elite level athlete and what that means and what goes into that. So we look forward to having you on the show again real soon.
Thanks, Bill.
All right, coaches, check out coachingyouthhoops.com/health. You'll have direct access to Shay and the Curve Health app. Thank you. Until next time.